I'd like to start by acknowledging the Noongar people, the traditional custodians of these lands and waters. I also acknowledge the Aboriginal people here today. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I was so glad I had an idea of something to talk about when Anna and Ted invited me. I was a little bit frightened, and then I realised, thinking about the public domain and connectedness and community and stuff, I would like to share with you some of my thoughts about socially engaged practice. And I always find labels are as inhibiting as they are enabling, but nonetheless, I think with socially engaged practice, for me, it's very important to distinguish it from participatory practice, and consequently, I'm going to borrow from the Tate's Art Terms website. Socially engaged practice, also referred to as social practice or socially engaged art, can include any art form which involves people and communities in debate, collaboration, or social interaction. So there's a whole, participatory art and socially engaged practice is, as you all know, sorry, my glasses are filthy, is a burgeoning area of contemporary practice. And there's so much great stuff happening across the world and in our country too, and there's some wonderful stuff happening here in Western Australia. But today I'm wanting to stick with socially engaged practice. Jeremy Deller's The Battle of Orgreave is a seminal work in this field. This 2001 work was a reenactment of a confrontation Deller witnessed as a young person watching TV. He saw striking miners being chased up a hill and pursued through a village. He said that this image has since become an iconic image of the 1984 strike, having the quality of a war scene rather than a labour dispute. So the work he created, the reenactment, involved about 800 historical reenactors, the sorts of people who, for fun, like to dress up and engage in reenacting of battles. And really interestingly, 200 former miners who'd actually been involved in the original strike and dispute, conflict. For Deller, the reenactors participated in the restaging of a battle that had occurred within living memory alongside veterans of that campaign. He says that he regards the work as digging up a corpse and giving it a proper post-mortem, or as a 1,000-person crime reenactment. I often, when I'm trying to explain, to people who don't know about this sort of stuff, I often quote Deller. I find this very resonant. This quote from him where he says, "I used to make things, now I make things happen." And now to talk to relevance. Here I would like to quote one of the field's leading curators, Nato Thompson, who has just left New York's Creative Time after an extraordinary 10 years, which began with the project Paul Chan created for post-Katrina New Orleans, Waiting for Godot. In a book I co-edited with my colleague Blair French, Civic Actions, Artist Practices Beyond the Museum, Thompson wrote that Chan's Waiting for Godot worked for the community of New Orleans, but it also changed Creative Time by radicalising its board. Particularly to the very serious issue of racism, which they encountered on a very personal level through this project. They encountered people who endured racism. And the project also dispelled a few classic myths in the art world, according to NATO, such as that if you do stuff with community, it is by nature terrible art. that it's unattractive to do community-based work. And this is NATO. Yeah, imagine this with a Jerry Springer accent. There are all these anxieties that if you do work that's politically relevant or deals with complicated political issues, it just isn't as glamorous. But you know what's glamorous, people? Doing shit that matters. Relevance is hot. Anyway, I find this very, very resonant stuff. Through the fog of my glasses, I thank you. Another artist, an artist for me that has really informed how I think about this work is Thomas Hirsch, who's a very conceptual artist, and his writings are highly theoretical and very poetic. I had the pleasure of seeing a show of his about his work in the public domain at the Deer in New York in 2012, and I just kept going back. I just kept reading things that nobody was saying in the discourse around this field. He talks about precarious moments of grace in his projects, and here I'm trying to talk about exchange. I know exchange is a very plain word, perhaps with earnest connotations, and I wish I was the poet that Hirschhorn is, because precarious moments of grace is indeed a beautiful phrase. He said, he has written, I want to be present all the time, and I want to produce something. I want, through presence and production, to create precarious moments of grace. Gracious moments where someone needs to be there and someone needs to be awake. And just indulge me by quoting Hirschhorn a little bit more. The precarious is the dynamic, the path, the possibility, and the movement that is offered to human beings. The future consists in the affirmation of this precariousness that is also the non-assured, the non-guaranteed, the non-stabilised, and the non-established. It will be the future because the precarious is always creative. The precarious is in motion. Because the precarious leads to new forms. Because the precarious shapes a new geography. Because the precarious starts with a new exchange between human beings. And because the precarious states new values. It's enough Hirschhorn. In July last year, Felicity Fenner and I were engaged as program co-associates, visual arts, for the Perth Festival. I too would like to acknowledge the very fine legacy established by Margaret, and if Felicity and I are very aware, if we can live up to her reputation and the calibre of her record here, we'll be doing very well indeed. But we have to do it differently. So, Felicity is a mad sports person, and I'm an AFL tragedy, but from the couch. And we were so excited about the inaugural Women's AFL National Competition. And we were so, there's only 8 teams in the fixture. You know it better than I do, I'm sure. The Dockers made the final 8. The Eagles didn't. The Swans didn't. So we were very, very excited. And it was also very evident, if you even read The Good Weekend, of the Noongar people's dominance in competitive AFL. So we were very inspired by these things. And Wendy Martin, thank you Wendy for joining us today, Artistic Director of the festival. Wendy is interested in works that engage with people. So we thought we had something going here, even though we had a very short lead time. And so we invited Melbourne-based Lara Toms and then Perth-based duo Snapcat, Anna Dunhill and Renee Coles are their other names, to create a work that responded to this auspicious moment in Australian sport and Australian society. Now, this is where I'm going to make my first mistake. Maybe not. I'm not sure. What happens again with the screen, Dane? Oh, that's right. Before the
Siren is a large-scale public artwork putting women at the centre of the field and using a lot of the masculine tropes of sport to focus and celebrate women sports people and female-orientated community groups. Teams of women have been playing football, coming together, gathering and supporting each other throughout history.
So last year in 2016, the AFL Women's League was announced to be going ahead this year in 2017, which it's just been hugely exciting across Australia.
I think it has also responded to a lot of questions and conversations that have been happening in the last couple of years, particularly I think around feminism and around a lot of different attitudes towards women.
So the work is commissioned, and the curator Anne Loxley approached us with the concept of the new Women's League and the idea of the site of Fremantle Oval. So it's really a site-specific response. It's a feminist response, and it's a kind of in line with all of our practices, which often involve people beyond the arts as performers and lots of kind of big craft spectacles.
So we're working with about 10 different community groups.
So we're working with the Butler Falcons, which is this incredible, very inspiring group of young female football players.
We're also working with a group called the Shirley Club, which is a group of women who are all called Shirley. It's an international club, but you can only be part of it if your name is Shirley. Oh, the Red Hatters. We're working with the Red Hatters, which is essentially a social group or a collection of social groups for women who are over 50. They are totally rambunctious and
about being very visible in public space and taking ownership of their kind of collective energy publicly and saying we're growing old outrageously, we're not hiding away. And we're also working with the Dockers Cheer Squad, who sing the team songs and get the crowd going. So a lot of the men from that group will be getting the crowd going to chant in support of the women's community groups.
So yeah, we're really hoping people will come down and cheer for the groups that they, can identify with or can get behind. That's going to be a really important part of the event.
Yeah.
Massive free event, open to everyone and anyone, family friendly. Bring your brother, your sister, your cousin, your uncle,
your nan,
anyone that likes football. What are they called?
Bleachers.
Yeah. Bring a cushion for the concrete bleachers.
Yeah.
So, let us be clear. We engage these artists. We did it. We weren't trying to do something about football. As David Zampatti, who consulted very generously in the lead up to the project, said to me, I understand it's football as metaphor for community. And more than that, it was about using the tropes of, mega sports to make a feminist comment. There were, in the process of the work, the artists engaged with, there were 200 people on the field as part of the event. So shall we say at least 200 people. There was a lot of workshops and conversations. The craft that they relied on was, of course, the football banner. That's much harder to make than you might think, one of those crepe paper banners. And the slogans all came from conversations with the groups. And the event essentially was a very choreographed version, of course, of a halftime spectacle. I'm sure all halftime spectacles are choreographed, but a very kind of deeply feminist version of one of those. Or an opening ceremony. So I'm just going to go quickly through these. People, it might take a moment, but that form that is the repeating motif on the Before the Sirens mascot is, of course, a bosom. And one of the other things that the artists gleaned from their work with the groups were all the phrases which then they used to write the lyrics for the event anthem. It just shows the beauty and breadth and strength of women and girls in Perth and Freo. And of course, there's these guys were hot. They were a fictitious male cheerleader group, but they were great, great dancers. So there's this very deliberate swapping of gender stereotypes. There was also a male bake stall. This work attracted criticism because of the absence of the Freo Dockers women's team. Their involvement was always conceptualised by the artists as a component of this rambunctious celebration of girl gangs and women's groups in Perth and Fremantle. The artists planned to involve them in strength displays, skill displays, and had secured the enthusiastic involvement of at least 9 players. But they were instructed not to participate because of a perceived conflict of sponsorship. Curtin University invests hugely in the Dockers players, and the club interpreted the festival's association with the University of Western Australia as prohibitive to their involvement in Before the Siren. So it's just another one of those things that you come up against out there in the world. Like, galleries are much easier places to negotiate. I'm sure you would all agree. You can't do much when that's the line that the club takes. But I'm not even going to say any more but still. I'm going to say nothing else about that. I'm going to say what was the great, great thing that emerged, and I think this was actually what should have happened, is that the artists then found the old girls of AFL in WA, the women who really established the club, and you probably don't need me to tell you what the inaugural competition meant to these women, and they are still buff and they could still kick, and there was really, to have that heroic focus shift to them, there was a rightness about that I think was inarguable. Claire Doherty, another leading curator in socially engaged practice and public domain work generally, she until very recently was director of the very fine agency in Bristol, Situations, and now she's the director of the Arnolfini in Bristol, and she's commissioned a lot of research about these kinds of crafted encounters in the public domain. And one of the key findings of Claire's work is that such projects demonstrate to people that things can be different. And as someone who was once a little girl and who now is the proud mother of a little girl, to see those girl guides in that company at that event made me so happy for what they would think of as their future.
Before the siren, we will shout loud before the siren. We will learn how to speak before the siren. We can do anything before the siren. We fight like girls before the siren. We will shout loud before the siren. We will learn how to spit before the siren. We can do anything before the siren. We fight like girls, run like a girl, kick like a girl, yeah, run like a girl, kick like a girl, run like a girl, kick like a girl, yeah, run like a girl, kick like a girl, sing it with me, run like a girl, kick like a girl, yeah, run like a girl, kick like a girl, come on Johnny, run like a girl.
That's what can happen when women come together. They can kick a goal in about 30 seconds flat against Johnny the mascot. Kick it, everyone. Come forward. We've got a very special award for everyone here. Well done. Full job tonight.
That's the siren.
the Girl Guides. Do not give the Girl Guides a drink.
I'd like to thank Deborah May, who's here today, for making that fine film for us. And also acknowledge Gina Williams, the wonderful singer of that beautiful anthem, and the composer, Elias Reeds. Now to something different, with wearing my other hat. I'm very humbled to work on this program called C3 West at the MCA in Sydney. C3 West is based on the belief that artists can bring unique value to situations beyond the gallery context. I think we all know that artists are fantastic thinkers and very individual and fearless thinkers. So, with that as our motivator, through careful brokerage processes, we create contexts in which artists work with communities, businesses, non-arts government organisations and arts organisations, usually in Western Sydney. We place artists at the core of these projects, giving local voices to local issues and collaborating with communities and businesses in new ways. I'd also like to acknowledge now the Darug people, the traditional custodians of the Cumberland Plain in Western Sydney. It stretches from Wiseman's Ferry in the north down to around Camden in the south. So in 2017, in collaboration with Blacktown Arts, we began working with the Darug and also Blacktown's broader Aboriginal population to address the site of the Blacktown Native Institution. The Native Institution opened in colonial Parramatta in 1814, and then it was moved in 1823 to nearby bushland, an area which would come to be known as Blackstown due to its large Aboriginal population. A residential school for Aboriginal and later Maori children, it represents the earliest instance of institutionalised removal of children in Australia and the beginning of the stolen generations. Due to poor attendance and mismanagement, the institution was closed in 1829. For the next 150 years or so, the site was a farm in various guises. Since the 1980s, it has been unused, in limbo, in the ownership of Blacktown Council and the New South Wales State Government. Bordered by Richmond Road and Rooty Hill Road North at an off-ramp of the M7, the ordinary-looking, if not forlorn-looking site is of huge significance to Aboriginal Australia, especially the Darug, many of whom are descendants of the Native Institution children. It also, of course, is a site of huge significance, surely to all of us. The stasis that has characterised the site since the 1980s is an agony to Aboriginal people and their supporters. So Blacktown Arts, C3 West and Urban Growth, the New South Wales Government's development arm, collaborated on a project to develop an achievable vision for Aboriginal ownership of the site, to create artworks honouring the history of the site, and to make a digital keeping place. So to achieve this, we organised 3 cross-disciplinary camps on site. We organised discussions with Aboriginal knowledge holders, with the community, of course, that was key. We held artist workshops, we held concerts. And the artists listened and talked, and they made things. I see Leanne Tobin's It Starts Here Now as both a participatory installation and a contemporary ritual of cleansing and healing. She created a massive spiral of red wood chips that community members and visitors walked in towards the centre of, carrying fresh eucalypt branches. This work remembered the original vegetation, that being the Cumberland Plain, and brought the group together in a gesture of friendship, unity and healing, while also acknowledging the pain of the past. Weavers Stephen Russell and Christine Stewart made eel traps, which they gave to the Darug community. This was a treasured gift for the Darug, as it honoured one of their important totems, the eel, which once ran in the creek on the site. The eel is one of the most important totems for Sydney. You know, the eel would come from the Parramatta River all the way out to the ocean, and then they would spawn, have their babies in the Pacific Ocean, and then the babies come all the way back to the Parramatta River. And this creek that I talk about, that was once the creek where the families of those kids in that institution, the families would sit in the creek singing lullabies to the kids in the institution. And it was also a place where the kids ran to when they ran away. It failed because kids ran away. Our final camp was a corroboree, and this is where we showed the artworks and had a whole lot of singing and ritual. Darren Bell was one of our artists. He created a portrait of the community that gravitated to the project, the Darug, the local Aboriginal community and the non-Aboriginal community. And here I like to just whack in, just because I think it's very true. Claire Doherty made a really cute short document called The New Rules of Public Art, and one of them quoted the notion of community, and she quoted Brian Eno, where he said that, you know, each event makes its own community, and I think there's truth in that. In my experience, these projects do create their own, you know, galaxy of people. This is one of two works which were attached to the heritage areas fence and signified to the site's significance. It is such a difficult site. The speed limit on the roads is 80 k's, for example. So I'd like to call this sort of work drive-by public art. And here, Leanne, this work used obviously the children's very familiar trope of paper dolls. And I think in the treatment of the eyes, you can see something of a spirit figure motif, but importantly overlaid on the figures are the rules of the institution. Carla Dickens often refers to words from the national anthem with bitter irony. Here, an installation of solar lights which reimagined the night sky above the institutionalised children was on a building frame on the actual heritage footprint of that building. I always wonder why I show this slide. It looks like we're dangerous, but I was 100% safe. And this work, before it was set ablaze, existed on the road as the other piece of drive-by art. In a medium referencing the sheets of the children's unfamiliar beds, Carla Dickens tied fabric strips to the fence enclosure to create the phrase, and it was amazing. We also created a website, a digital keeping place for the stories associated with the BNI residents and their descendants. There were many project outcomes. One thing was a lot of people in the Darug community hadn't been in meetings with each other. Thanks, Catherine. For 15 years, we're happy to be in meetings with each other. Blacktown Council allocated $230K to some financial modelling for the future use of the site. We won some awards, stuff. It's very, I take my hat off to my colleagues at Blacktown Arts. They prioritise their very substantial Aboriginal community as their core community, and this project is a continuation of other work they've done on the BNI. We're signing up with them for another project with some wonderful artists, someone that many of you in the room will know, the wonderful Sharon Egan, Tony Albert, and Mugalan Performing Arts. They've been engaged to develop concepts and outcomes that embrace the BNI site as a living community memorial of local, national and international importance for the stolen generations, based on Indigenous knowledges. The project will be deeply engaged with the Darug and Blacktown Aboriginal communities, and the work the artists produce will be collaborative and interdisciplinary. We've just had an intense development week. I'm not going to talk any more about that because I want to talk about this, my final project for you today. Commissioned by Melbourne's Next Wave Festival, and this year presented at Hobart's Dark Mofo, and recently at Carriageworks in Sydney as part of Performance Space's Live Works, Nat Randall's The Second Woman is probably not best described as a socially engaged project. It's probably more a durational participatory performance work with a very serious social agenda. So something like that. But exchange is fundamental to this work, which is both exquisitely beautiful and glamorous in Nato Thompson's sense of the word. It's relevant. It offers a feminist queer critique of the power dynamics of gendered political power structures, from one-to-one relationships to society. It's inspired by a film by John Cassavetes, Opening Night, 1977 film, in which there's a theater sequence. Randall has said she's drawn to the slippages of performativity in Roland's character, also to Roland's relationship with Cassavetes. Of course, they were lovers in life as well as collaborators on the film. Essentially, as Nat says, in the movie's theatrical sequence, it doesn't look like it here, a woman is asking a man for compassion. Now, this is my theatrical moment. I'm now sharing with you some embargoed information, so please treat it as embargoed information. But this work's coming to the Perth Festival. Yes, I've never dealt with embargoes before. So it's an adaptation of the sequence is the basis of a 24-hour performance in which she repeats this scene with 100 men. And because it is coming to you, I'm quite tortured about how to talk about it, because I don't want to go, and then this happens, and then that happens, and then that happens, because I don't want you to spoil it. I definitely want you to come. But shall I just say that her collaborator, Anna Brecken's script departs from the film form and is instead a meticulously nuanced script which allows the participants to position themselves, which in turn fuels Randall's highly individualised responses to each participant. I think Brecken's magnificent script is matched by Randall's amazing performance and her capacity to read each participant. How am I going now, Catherine? 2 minutes, okay. So I'm going to say, I'm not going to speak fast. Initially, one would say the male participant holds a passive form of power, but in things such as the food throwing and then dancing, there's this constant negotiation, and the power dynamic shifts. It's strangely addictive work. I thought I was special in that when I went to Dartmouth, I stayed for 11 hours, but that's just kind of average amongst the people I know. And I think Jade Muratori explained the allure by pointing out, of course, the stakes are very high. There's a lot of risk. There's risk of violation. She and her crew have a whole lot of cues for, if someone is a bit off. So in that vulnerability that Nat sort of embraces and says it makes for a great show, it makes for a compelling show. Since it's 2 minutes, I'm just going to, in terms of exchange, let me just show you some more great images. You've got a wonderful cinema thing that goes on which shows you the exchange in excruciating detail. Oh, I don't even know what day it's on, Wendy, but we're looking for volunteers. Yeah, that's right. What is the exchange? The man gets paid $50. There's an opportunity to reflect on masculinity, femininity, and power. One finds that the aspiring actors probably are. It's an obvious gig for them, but it's very evident when it's an aspiring actor. I'm just going to finish with what one of the participants, Jimmy Dalton, who participated in the Dark Mofo version of the event, said, each participant goes in with a certain assumption. Some definitely want to play the villain. They've read the script and went, this man is going to be an asshole. And some want purely to be the best lover ever seen on stage. Have I shown the man with his shirt off? That's very scary, I think. Going on quoting this man, Jimmy Dalton, what this show works on the smallest level is how patriarchy can play out. It is so important right now. We're living in a time where there are Trumps and Weinsteins. There's a lot of revelation. Speaking as a man, it's about my complicity and my participation in this. Thank you.